Mayor for chairing the meeting in my absence. I had a meeting off-site this morning, which was very worthwhile. So the next item, I'd like to go back to item 14, which I asked the Deputy Mayor to hold off until I was here. So item 14 is wellhead security improvements, and Pauline, I'd like to invite you to introduce the report.
Right, thank you. So look, as a result of Havelock North, after we inadvertently lost our secure status, the ITI Committee sought a report from staff to provide the costs and timeframes for above grounding all of our wellheads. We felt this information was necessary in order to make good decisions around our water supply safety. This report contains that information that we sought, stating 21.5 million and up to 6 years to do the above grounding. This is helpful, but unfortunately both the costs and the time frames are unpalatable due to our overarching desire to remove the chlorination within 12 months. So the committee noted that below ground wellheads are compliant with the Drinking Water Standard New Zealand, but in order to comply they must be well sealed to prevent any ingress of any contaminants. This report shows that there could be a combination of mitigations that will, under the current standards, give us secure status, including the use of UV at the pump stations, of which there are 53. So we've requested that staff provide a report back in May, and this will probably, I would say, come directly to Council due to the fact that there's no ITI Committee meeting in May because we've got a lot of LTP hearings. And also because we're treating this issue as a top priority. So each wellhead will be investigated on a case-by-case basis and currently is being investigated. The work is ongoing. And therefore we'd expect to emerge a package of different options and scenarios, ensuring the 12-month timeframe will be met, if at all possible. The options will include above grounding where practicable, affordable and timely, below ground repairs, UV treatment at the pump station, or even abandoning some wells that are not really needed or they're shallow or they're old bores. So staff will come back with an affordable option that will enable us to cease chlorination within 12 months, thank you, and see our drinking water comply with the drinking water standards. So the clear messages that we want to put through today from the committee is that we're standing by our decision around the temporary chlorination. And yes, we do have our foot on the pedal to get the repairs and renewals work done. And no matter what the outcome of any announcement that may be imminent or not, the work we're doing is necessary, it's right, it's responsible, and it's a sound investment in our infrastructure work that will ensure that our drinking water is safe in the future. So I just want to reiterate that the program of work is ongoing, it is not halted, and no matter what happens in the future, this work needs to be done to ensure our water safety.
Thank you. Just before I open it up for questions, I just wanted to comment that there are two other matters that I think that we have to keep our attention on. One is the Chief Executive has commissioned a review of what has actually occurred in terms of losing our secure status just prior to Christmas, and the sequence of events that led to that, and the relationship with the Havelock North inquiry, and any other elements that will be of importance to the Council in terms of how it monitors progress in the future. So that's being undertaken by Mr. Bruce Robertson, and we're expecting a draft report by the end of next month. And is it by the end of next month or sooner?
Sooner to the Chief Executive.
Yeah.
Okay, and so then perhaps a final report by the end of May, which is actually quite a tight time frame that he's operated under, but he has been interviewing all of the relevant staff, members of the governance team, members of some externals as well, drinking water assessor, obviously medical officer of health. So it's an in-depth report, and I think it's going to be incredibly helpful in terms of what has actually happened so that we are in a better position to judge our steps forward in the future. The second is that, of course, everyone's now waiting for the government's announcements in relation to the Havelock North inquiry itself, and it's quite clear that certain levels of inspections that are required under the drinking water standards, that the way that they are being applied now is much more stringent than perhaps they were being applied prior to Havelock North, and so that has an element of contribution to where we're up to. But what the government decides will obviously impact on what we need to do in the future. But I think, as Pauline has said quite clearly in her comments, this is best practice. This is what we have to do. We need to protect the mechanisms that supply our drinking water, and so this is a step that we have to do regardless. And with those wider issues, that will be really important. I'm hoping that the government understands that there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to drinking water supply around the country. We take our responsibilities really, really seriously. We test every day. That is not required under the current standard, but we do it because we want to protect our drinking water supply. So, and we do want to get the chlorine out of the water as quickly as we can. I was concerned to read the comments in the press this morning. I know that there were elements of that story that were written before Dave Adamson, myself and the Chief Executive were interviewed, and it is of concern that somebody who is not an expert is making opinion statements in the public to create a sense of concern around two different things. And I tried to explain this, and I'll try to explain it one more time. There are two issues that are being conflated. One is the aquifer from which our drinking water supply is obtained as it comes up through the many layers, because it is the deep aquifers that we're talking about. With boreholes, boreheads that we are required to fix in order to supply the water. With boreheads that may or may not have any direct relationship with it, assuming that something from the surface can travel all the way down and then find its way somewhere in the mix back up into the system. I mean, it is actually quite irresponsible for somebody to be presenting that as anything other than an unvalidated opinion. And I certainly am going to meet with the Chief Executive about how we might resolve some of the concerns that obviously will be raised by people who might read that and think that there is any element of that that is worthy of further consideration than the dismissal that I would give it. So, on that note, could I perhaps open this up for questions? I attended the ITI committee that considered this. Everything was really worked through, I think, in a detailed way. But if anyone has any outstanding questions on it, I'll take those first. But there is one other thing that I'll just mention, that arising out of all of this, there remains concern in the general public about the decision that we have taken to temporarily chlorinate our water supply. I've put it on Facebook yet again, early hours of this morning. You know, the medical officer of health would have directed us to chlorinate the water if we hadn't made that decision. I want the medical officer of health standing side by side with me when we ask the central government for an exemption if they make a blanket rule for the country. And that's why we chose to go down the path of chlorination on a temporary basis. It's a temporary decision that we've made. We've given staff 12 months. If that's going to take more than 12 months, they have to come back and tell us why and ask for permission to continue to chlorinate. So there's a lot of water to go under the bridge yet. before we get to a final conclusion. But because I want to send the signal out to the public as strongly as I possibly can, this may be something that I will elevate to the status of a mayoral task force, as we did with the flooding when we were under extreme situation there. And I am going to consider that, but I want to do that in the context of what the government decides, in the context of the Bruce Robertson report when it lands, and in the context of the advice that we get back from staff on the next steps, which will be coming directly back to council. So I've just abused my position as the chair of this meeting to give my speech, and I'll open it up for questions. Raf.
Yeah, thanks. I think that last bit was quite useful in terms of elevating this to a more strategic approach, because what concerns me here, and certainly when I look at resolution number 3, where it says proceed with delivery of works, blah, 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 when the solution is obvious due to its economic timing. The problem I have is every single report we've had on this has been different every time it comes, so which suggests that actually the solutions aren't obvious. And I'm not seeing a clear strategic framework as part of long-term infrastructure as to how we should approach the management of our water supply. We keep coming up each time with new solutions to problems we just found out a month ago, and I'm not sure this is the right way to approach this. This is going to be a much bigger issue. So raising the wellheads here, that absolutely makes sense, but in terms of having a strategic approach that takes into account, obviously the report on the maintenance, but also the government's position, probably needs a different approach, I would suggest. So that's just my feedback on that.
Thank you.
Can I respond to
Well, yeah, okay.
just about the use of the word obvious? That was to ensure that anything that has it, so some wells cannot be overgrounded, above grounded. They might be in public access ways or in parks. That's an obvious one. Get in there and mitigate that. Some of them need to be above grounded and renewed. That's a no-brainer. So so we didn't have to use the word no-brainer actually. That's to ensure that the program is continuing as we speak. Yeah. Because we're really trying to reach that 12-month period. The ITI committee is also calling for a report on the program, as you suggested, the whole program, monthly updates or even fortnightly updates to keep ahead of the progress on this project.
Well, I guess actually, because I probably didn't actually ask the question specifically in terms of to staff, and when I look at a report further down around the northwest and how that timetable had been moved out, and I don't think I didn't know about that, but are you confident that actually the current approach, which seems to me to be sort of slightly ad hoc, is strategic enough to deal with the whole issue at the level that we need to deal with it?
The May report is likely to put forward to the council a number of options, and we need to think about those options in terms of weighted attributes, in terms of money and time, above ground, below ground, continuing chlorination, or putting UV in. I think the view of the staff is that where for any set of options the solution is still the same, that's where we had mandate to go ahead and continue to try and keep this thing on program.
From a strategic point of view, a good example, we are out in the market at the moment to get expressions of interest around UV equipment, because basically till we get that, and that closes on the 3rd of May, until we get information like that, I can't actually give you a set timetable. I don't know what the delivery times is. I don't know the availability. I don't actually know the availability of temporary UV equipment that may be able to come through as container, but we're hoping, so those are some of the works that we are proceeding so we can actually get you a strategic approach. Again, if it's going to take 5 years to do, well, it doesn't become an option, but I've actually got something solid, and so a lot of staff are working on those kind of, so that we can bring you back in May a very clear strategic approach to what there is. There are also some examples where you've got maybe a pump station with 3 above ground wellheads, and you've only got 1 below. basically what's the most economic option in that kind of scenario. It may be to raise that one above the ground. As the Mayor said, we are unaware of what the government's going to do in the long term, but I think we've made Council aware that we have asked our consultants, Becca, to do a report for us around what would meet the current drinking water standards, which are risk-based, and what are likely to meet the future. Now, I think the future drinking water standards will be risk-based. Any safety system is risk-based. So, you know, I don't think they're fundamental underground. It's just where does that risk shift to? And there's a little bit of gauging. So I do think that the report coming back to you in May will have a lot more strategic feel to it, and some of the options hopefully might not be eliminated, but they'll be actually a lot clearer about why they've been applied in various cases, which will give you a lot better feel for where we go from there.
Yeah, because I think, you know, the risk-based approach is appropriate, and we have discussed that at audit and risk. And so I think the question here is, are we rushing to meet some self-imposed deadline around the chlorination, which is, you know, to meet that goal, as opposed to meet the bigger goal, which is actually the critical maintenance of our water supply and water delivery system, which is what should be driving the behaviours and the investments. And that's what I'm more interested in seeing.
That is the approach that we want to adopt. So, and I think that what has happened is that, I mean, with the temporary chlorination decision, because it appears that this latest sort of opinion that's floated to the surface has emerged from somebody brought in specifically to peer review the temporary chlorination, not to look at the wellheads program. So until staff get feedback from the market in relation to the UV option, how quickly could that be brought in on a temporary basis, on a lease basis, on a permanent basis? You know, once they've got that information, then we can make the assessment about putting something in place which then enables the chlorination to go while we continue a program of bringing the wellheads above ground, because that seems to me to be core critical to the effective running of the infrastructure. So it is a major infrastructure question, but we're going to be getting the external advisory group's report this afternoon, and that really has identified how core critical it is that we have a far more detailed approach to the governance of our capital program, and that may require a committee that's focused 100% on our capital program as a whole instead of the separation across different committees. So there's quite a lot of, as I say, water to go under the bridge, but I think Dave's right, the next report will have a lot more of a strategic feel to it. But that's why I'm sitting in the background thinking mayoral task force, because we need to lift this up out of the ground, like the wellheads, and we need to really focus on how do we make sure that we continue to deliver our pristine water to the households of Christchurch without having to chlorinate it, because that's got to be a focus for who we are as a city.
Yeah, and I agree the chlorination piece is important, but it is not the most important piece. So I just don't want the goalposts to keep shifting every time we have a report on this. We'll set the goalposts at the beginning, like what are the outcomes we're looking for,
Yeah.
and then drive
But the
investments from it.
goalposts shifted when Becca changed its approach, or when it reported finally on the wellheads that it had inspected. So that shifted the goalposts, and then the goalposts were shifted again when the approach that was adopted by CityCare was determined to be insufficient to meet the standard as it is now being applied.
Yeah, but that's arguable, and until we see that report.
Yes,
so
correct,
for
which
me
is
it's like,
why I want to kind of hold things until we've got that report and we've got the government's feedback from the inquiry. But anyway, I've got Yanni, Vicky, Phil.
So, I've read through the Becca report. It's quite hard to read it electronically, and I don't know if there's a hard copy that we can have access to, because you can't follow the pages because the way it's laid out and it's very small print. But there doesn't seem to be, when we've had briefings on this, you've identified a map that shows where we've got above ground that doesn't need temporary chlorination, and you've showed ones that are above ground that will need it, and you know there was 3 or 4 areas I think that possibly with a little bit of work wouldn't need temporary chlorination, but there's no sense in this report about what work's being done on those, so we've got a very generic resolution to proceed with the delivery of works. But can you just talk through, and I put these questions through I think last week or the week before around the ones that I'm aware of, which were Avonhead and Tanner. I've read through the information and hear about Tanner. There's no mention of it in the report. Can you just talk us through what you're doing around individual, the individual well heads to get temporary chlorination out of where it could be a relatively low, easy solution?
We've gone through the pump stations that we can run with only above ground wellheads have been the priority, and so we've got the wellheads declared secure by the drinking water assessor because they are the person that has that authorisation. We are also got a program of going through every other above ground wellhead and get them signed off as secure, so that we've got a suite of sign-offs ready to go as soon as we can. Now there may be some wellheads that, or sorry, some pump stations that might have 2 above ground wellheads and 1 below, for example, where we may get enough demand from those who may be able to meet demand by just having the 2 above ground, and we can turn off the below ground while we fix it. And those are some of the things of the analysis criteria that the team's working through in the next couple of days to see what do we need. One of the real problems, and you'll see that in the Northwest report, is sometimes you go deep. The deeper aquifers aren't as good quantity-wise, far better quality-wise and secure-wise, but quantity-wise they don't match what you can get out of the higher or the less depth. So sometimes we're having to replace 1 bore with 2 bores when you go deeper just to get that flow. So those are all things that the team's looking at, but they are looking at the priority. The idea is to, while we've got all chlorination running by the end of, or temporary chlorination running by the end of this month, we intend, as we get secure status sign-off from the drinking water assessor, that we then progressively turn that chlorination off.
No, I understand that, but you know, from 2 weeks ago when we got briefed till now, there's time that elapses, and I don't have any sense of the work that's been done around those ones. There's no information on Tanner in this report, and yet that was one that you identified in the briefing to us that was above ground, that didn't, there were certain things that I think, you know, that now that, and again, it's a bit like the previous question, is the goalposts have now shifted again, and there's extra work that needs to be done on it because it's
not signed off by Beckers at this point in time, and so we are doing that, and as we've mentioned, we are getting that peer reviewed so that we can work through that. In the meantime, we've, like I say, put a contract together for UV. We've looked at that. We've got people doing a water model so that we can work out on what are the independencies around the different pump stations, the different wellheads. We are looking at what can we do around demand management, because again, as we've mentioned to you, demand management, we may be able to restrict use of our water, even days for sprinkling, for example. So those are all things that staff are working on at this point in time. They are looking at the supply chain, what is available through, and I think we've mentioned it to you, of using our panels to get all that. And those are all the pieces that we're going to pull together.
No, I think that's the question. The question's been asked and answered.
Yeah,
that's absolutely clear.
Clear direction from
They've
the
got clear
committee on
direction to move ahead and shut off the chlorination whenever they can get a pump station completely cleared because of all the wellheads that are feeding into that pump station by the drinking water assessor. They can't work faster than the sign-off process. So your question's been asked and answered. Sorry, and I'd like to move on now. Thank you.
Can I just get it
I'd like
clear?
to move on now because you've asked your question and it's been answered. Vicky.
Been answered.
Just the issue with this, I was at the ITI committee, so I've had a chance to ask lots of questions, but intriguingly, as this becomes more and more public, there are lots more questions that come up from the public. I wonder, Dave, if you could just describe to us the difference between Havelock North and Christchurch City.
We put up a report when the Havelock, the first report came out from Havelock North, explaining the different management structures we had in place, the different monitoring, the different regime, the different governance that we had across, the difference in the catchment areas that we put up. Now, look, I'm sorry, I can't remember the detail of that report, but that went up, I think, around May.
Look, can we get that report actually perhaps put on the council website, on the perhaps on the Newsline site, so that councillors can link to it, because I am crystal clear that there is an enormous difference between Christchurch and Havelock North. One's a rural constituency that has had the ingress of contamination from a nearby stream that was contaminated from the agricultural sector. This is a city water supply where we test every single day. So, you know, I mean, thank you for raising that. It's an excellent question, but I would really like, and I'm looking over to Ross and the team over there, a summarise of the report, but link to the actual report so that people can read it if they want to. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, second question.
The report in this morning's paper from an advocate who thinks, actually in an earlier statement, that chlorine is the biggest advancement in the 21st century, and who noticeably doesn't, and who has actually said he does not want elected councils controlling water, and clearly has a clear agenda around that, and has also been quoted as saying he has a total objection to any city having exemption on the Havelock North, after the Havelock North Authority. So his statements about the 1,850 private bores, could you just explain how the private bores actually link into or don't link into the drinking water system to a state?
If you have a look at what came out of Havelock North, there are recommendations not only to district and city councils, there was recommendations to the Ministry of Health, there was to local CHPs, but also to regional councils. Now, those bores are controlled really by the regional council. We do work in partnership with the regional council. We've got a joint, where in actual fact, I'm just trying to think of what it's called, a joint reference group, water reference group, that incorporates all of the local authorities in Canterbury and the regional council to look at how we, through the right regulatory regime, the right regulatory regime, ensure that you do where you can, protecting those resources as is needed. As you can see, there are a huge number of bores, but a good example is we've just recently put down a couple of bores for heat exchangers, one for the library, or two for the library really, and two for the town hall, and they have gone down to the appropriate standards that are set today. I think within the report we've said there's a couple that have been put down to that standard into deep bores that now are not going to be used for heat, and they could be actually used, they're a good investment, they may be able to be used for drinking water, so that shows the standard that some of those goes down. So, yeah. Well, I don't know the numbers. I'm sorry. I haven't counted the numbers. I can get it. You can get a map of Canterbury maps that go down. Certainly, we've got 5 or 6 aquifers under here, and they all do in there. But basically, part of the issue, and we put down multiple bores on similar sites. You do them in such a way that you make sure, or you try to make sure that the flows from each one of them don't interfere with the flows from others. Yeah.
For our own wells, under the drinking water standards, one of the requirements is to make sure that the bore is sealed so that you can't get surface water tracking down the outside of the bore into the aquifer we're taking water from. If we're successful in doing that, we have a secure wellhead. The issue with the unregulated wells in close proximity is if water is drawn from our well, which can create a cone of depression in the aquifer, surface water may track down an unregulated well casing into that aquifer. and be a source of contamination.
As the Mayor said, though, we monitor our water sources. We, in actual fact, have never had a transgression in our water sources for the last 100 years. And so the risk, while it may be there, is not being materialised in any of our networks. And while the Mayor says we monitor daily, we actually monitor in multiple places right across the network. We don't only monitor our water sources, we also monitor our reticulation network, our reservoirs, to make sure that we are not getting post-production contamination.
So can I just clarify, after what you said, that the standards for private bores implemented by ECAN are exactly the same as what we would expect for ours?
I don't believe so, because our bores are governed by the drinking water standards.
So
Ones though that we are putting down, and I know the ones that we're putting down for heat exchanges meet exactly our standards.
those ones?
Good.
It's the other ones and ECAN that you're now causing me some concern about. Just so, how do we ensure that those private wells, for example, or private bores, are actually, if they're used, are constructed and used in the same way as we would expect? If they could even remotely, and I appreciate it's completely remote, have an impact on our drinking water.
That's part of the working party that we're working with ECAN, and that's part of the recommendations that come out of the Havelock North around the responsibility of regional councils to ensure that those are appropriate, regulated and appropriately constructed.
So is ECAN taking action on that?
I don't know. It'd be a question that would have to go to ECAN. So
I think I might just send it them.
Well, I think that we can do better than that. I think we can get them to
put in a resolution.
But we can actually have we can invite them to provide some information for the next report.
Yep.
But I'm happy for that to be included in the resolution. But I mean, you've just alerted me to comments that this individual has made. But it's we need to remove the ability of water suppliers to supply unchlorinated water. We need to remove political interference from water supply. We need to give a strong regulator teeth to ensure that compliance with the standards is better than all practicable steps. He doesn't believe that we should ever have unchlorinated water.
No, absolutely. And so if you research it further, not only does he believe that chlorine is the best thing ever, the biggest advancement in the 21st century, everybody should have chlorinated water, and he does not want elected councils controlling water. He actually says, why should people who are elected every 3 years have any say in the water that you drink? It's obviously far better, in his view, that some controller from Auckland has total absolute say.
So, but why wasn't that reported in the paper this morning with his comments?
I don't know,
because
they were quite easy to find.
Okay, no, well, I found them now. I only looked up his name on the internet to find out who he worked for.
Yes.
All right.
I looked at his comments.
just coming back to there are three issues around secure water supplies, and I think you look at the risks, they talk about multiple barriers. There is the wellheads, which is why we've lost our secure, which we are doing the work on the moment. There is the modelling of also the hydrogeological modelling that was done in 2005, and we are working through through that with the drinking water assessors at the moment. And the third point is around monitoring, looking at variations and ageing things. And so those are the three things. Now, probably, Councillor Buck, when the hydrogeological model comes through, that will actually address the kind of issues that you are raising. I'm not sure, John, but I think that's probably still 12 months away, in that some of the sampling, especially the ageing of water, and when I say the ageing of water, it actually doesn't age just the average age of the water. It can somehow tell you the percentage of young water and the percentage of old water, and so it's quite complicated, but I think one of those tests takes something like 6 months just to perform, and we have to do that on all of our wells, and so that's the information that's been gathered at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, so I had, who else did I have? I had Glenn. Dion.
Well, thank you. My question, we're talking about New Zealand standards, David, obviously. In the World Health Organisation guidelines, it says chlorine disinfection of drinking water has limitations against the protozoan pathogens, in particular Cryptosporidium and some viruses. The outbreak in Havelock North was Campylobacter. If you look up both words, the symptoms seem the same in terms of effects on the population. So chlorine is no guarantee of, as a barrier.
Chlorine is a barrier against bacteria, there's no doubt about that, but it does need a contact time. If it's actually in contact with protozoa for a long period of time, it does have an effect on them, but basically that's a long detention time, and we wouldn't be able to afford to build that detention time in there. And so that's why some of the, one of the great things about UV is it does take protozoa, but when I say that, we have never, and I don't believe there's been a record of any protozoa in deep groundwater recorded, as according to our people. So basically it's a risk that is very infinitesimal. It's a little bit like, it's unfortunately if something went wrong, basically the consequence could be big.
Normally you would attempt to have a chlorine contact time in the order of 30 minutes. We've got agreement with the DWA that we have contact time in the order of 1 minute because of the low risk regarding protozoa.
Dion?
My question is around the amount of, or the implementation of the preferred option here. And because this is a public document, it says here that it's 15 to 20 wellheads per year. We've got to do 80. I just want to explicitly, that would assume it would take 4 years to above ground them all. I just want us to be very, I just want you to explain very clearly what that means in terms of the previous resolution that we have around 12 months and the exact work that you're thinking might be done to sort of, mitigate that.
In the report it talks about, that was what it would take BAU. I think Council, it's really important that Council's recognised the need to upgrade, and they've actually had a progressive program of upgrading below to above ground, and that's been going on for almost a decade now, so you've been doing it. Those time frames is if we continue BAU. We've, business as usual, basically. If you have a look, we have reported back to you that we've got construction panels in place, which means that we can procure quicker. We can actually get people in there quicker once we know what we want to buy. And that's the real issue about what do we want to buy. My understanding is the timetable is probably, or the difficulty in timetable is probably not around the supply chain, it's more around the interdependability of our pump stations and our wellheads, and that model is probably going to have more impact on our timeline. But until we know exactly what we want to do, what could we do? What could we do by just taking, can we just take one wellhead on a pump station offline, have all of the others, or do I have to take the whole pump station down? Do I have to take it down for 1 day, or can I, do everything and then take it down for 1 day, or do I have to take it out for 3 months? Those are the things that the people are, the team is looking at all those probabilities. So that was some time frames if you were going to do a one approach and principally business as usual.
Okay, cool. And the other point in the report that's written here that's out in the public is the 5%, which might be a requirement to, for the water loss. And in 2015, 2016, we're at 11.7%. I just wanted to just explain the work that's going on to reduce our water loss, but also to answer what was the water loss after the earthquakes and in the subsequent years, and did we have any transgressions in the water supply because of the increased water loss from the breakages that we obviously had after the earthquake?
We're not aware of any transgressions due to the water loss. Post the earthquake, I think that we went up close to something over 20% unaccounted for water, and SCIRT went through a program on a zone-by-zone basis of returning the water loss at a point of time to pre-earthquake levels. The comment regarding 5% is something that I think is what is being achieved in the Northern Hemisphere, where they have an unchlorinated supply, and that is one of their KPIs to maintain, to continue with that.
Just sorry, just one subsequent question to that. So after the earthquake, we went up to around 20%, and we didn't have any of the transgressions in the water supply that are potentially, one of the issues that may come through.
We did have transgressions in the water supply, and that was probably around gross breaking of the pipes, brittle pipes, which is what led to the temporary chlorination at that time, and to boiled water notices for a period.
Yeah, but after we fix those?
No, none.
None, okay.
I think two things. So in your LTP, you have actually put in, on the next LTP, the draft LTP, you have put in quite a significant amount of investment. You put more investment as a percentage-wise into your network of water pipes than any of your other networks, because it's been recognised as a priority to look at that unaccounted for water. As previously mentioned, we do use a lot of water in Christchurch.
The percentage that we have within New Zealand, I think, is probably quite a good standard nationally, and to progressively reduce it significantly would take a lot of effort.
Right. Yeah, we're coming up to the adjournment at 12 o'clock, so I'm going to suggest that we adjourn and come back at 1:30. Which is half an hour prior to the EAG turning up at 2 o'clock. So that'll be enough time to conclude this paper. So, so we've got 2 more minutes. So Pauline.
Oh, I was just wondering if we could put, instead of requirements there, in 8 regulatory standards might be better. Do you think? It's a bit more precise, because it's the regulation that we're really looking.
The regulatory standards?
Yes, regulatory standards.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'd like to add another one that we start working with the government as well.
And we haven't already. Why?
No.
Yeah. So, okay, so 9, continue to work with central government in relation to the Havelock North inquiry. Is that what you mean?
In relation to an exemption.
Well, they haven't made their announcement about what they're doing yet. So, continue to work with central government in relation to the findings of the Havelock North inquiry. David, did you have a question?
Yes, there was discussion in recent weeks about the possibility of isolating some catchments or not having to chlorinate in some catchments. Can we have an update on whether anything of that nature has occurred or is likely to?
We'll come back with the zones. What we're trying to do is a citywide approach to do it, so we can incorporate that into our May report if you like, Councillor East.
Thank you.
Yep. Mike? All right. Okay, so yep. Do I have a seconder? Phil? All right, so I'll adjourn the meeting until 1:30 and we'll come back for the debate. I would like people to read the newspaper article from Mr. Rabbits in the New Zealand Herald on the 8th of December, where he does suggest that this is about me not wanting to chlorinate the water, and I shouldn't be allowed to be influencing the decision at all. No, he specifically names me. I'll send it to everyone. Thank you.